The crystal champagne flute felt cold against my knuckles. It was my 80th birthday party, October 12th, and the crisp autumn sunlight streamed into my apartment, illuminating the faces of my family. My son, David, knelt beside my armchair, his expression a mask of practiced concern. He slid a sheaf of papers onto my lap and placed a heavy pen in my hand. "Just a formality, Dad," he murmured. As my fingers traced the signature line, he gently guided my hand. Across the room, Dr. Evans gave a solemn, approving nod. The transaction was complete. The party noise faded to a low hum. My gaze drifted past David's shoulder to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had loved this view of the city for 30 years. David stood up, pocketing the pen. He walked over to the mantelpiece, picked up the keys to my home, my fortress, my sanctuary, and dropped them into his own coat pocket with a soft, final jingle. My daughter Chloe watched from the kitchen doorway, her hand clutching a wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked down, refusing to meet my eyes. "He's a danger to himself. He keeps forgetting things. We're protecting him," David announced to the silent room, his voice resonating with false nobility. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. He was performing, and this was his stage. The words were not for me, but for them. A preemptive justification for the coup he had just executed. The worst part was the sliver of truth. I had forgotten where I put my reading glasses last Tuesday. A minor slip, now magnified into a weapon of mass destruction. My mind flashed back unbidden to another official ceremony. David, 25 and beaming, placing his hand on my old Bible as I swore him into the bar. His eyes, then, were full of admiration and a fierce desire to follow in my footsteps. He'd squeezed my arm and said, "I'll make you proud, Dad." I remember the scent of the courtroom's old leather and wood polish, a smell I always associated with integrity. Now, that same scent, lingering on the furniture around me, felt like an accusation. "We should get him packed," Chloe said, her voice thin. "Just the essentials for now." Two men I didn't recognize, dressed in nondescript polo shirts, entered the room. They weren't party guests. They moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency that chilled me to the bone. David gestured towards my bedroom. "Help him get his things. Be respectful." The command was a masterpiece of public relations, painting him as the benevolent caretaker while I was being systematically dismantled in my own home. As one of the men guided me towards my study, I paused at the doorway, my eyes landing on the mahogany desk. There it sat, next to a stack of law reviews, my old judicial gavel. It was worn smooth from years of use, the dark rosewood grain deep and rich. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, a gift from my wife Isabel on the day I was appointed to the bench. It was the one object in the room that felt like an extension of my soul, a symbol of a lifetime of judgment and reason. David noticed my stare. He walked over, picked up the gavel, and balanced it in his palm. He looked at it not with sentiment, but with the dismissive air of an appraiser. "This old thing?" he scoffed, his thumb rubbing over the worn wood. "Just a paperweight. Honestly, Dad, the sentimental junk you keep." He tossed it back onto the desk with a dull thud. "We'll put it in a box. It can go into storage with the rest of the clutter." He saw a piece of wood. I saw my entire life. A box. My life's work, my memories, reduced to clutter for a 10 by 10 storage unit. I said nothing. Arguing would only prove his point, feeding his narrative of an agitated old man. I allowed myself to be led into my bedroom, the image of that gavel, discarded and trivialized, burning in my mind. He had no idea what it was. He had no idea what Isabel had insisted we do with it 30 years ago. His ignorance was my only remaining asset. Downstairs, in the polished marble lobby of my building, the doorman, Mike, gave me a confused look. "Everything all right, Judge Leonard?" he asked, his brow furrowed. Before I could answer, David put a firm hand on my shoulder. "Dad's just not feeling well," he said loudly, for anyone in earshot. "We're taking him for a little rest. Doctor's orders." The public humiliation was a scalpel, precise and deep. I, Judge Leonard, who had sent men to prison, was now a doddering invalid being escorted from my home. A black sedan was waiting at the curb. It was not a taxi. The men in polo shirts opened the back door, and I was gently but inexorably guided inside. The door closed with a heavy, soundproof thud, severing my connection to the world I knew. Through the tinted window, I saw my apartment building shrink as we pulled away. My home, my life. Now a crime scene, and I was the only victim. We drove for 20 minutes, leaving the familiar city grid for a manicured suburban campus I didn't recognize. The building was modern, with too much glass and steel, trying to look more like a resort than what it was, a gilded cage. The Willow Creek Wellness Center read the discreet sign out front, a name so pleasant it had to be hiding something terrible. I was being checked into a psychiatric facility. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Inside, the air was sterile and smelled faintly of lavender and bleach. A nurse with a plastic smile led me to a room. It was clean, minimalist, and utterly devoid of character. A bed, a small desk bolted to the wall, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. This was to be my new reality. The nurse handed me a set of pale blue pajamas. "Dr. Evans will be by to see you shortly," she chirped. "He just needs to finalize the paperwork for your hold." "My hold?" I repeated, the legal term a bitter taste in my mouth. "What kind of hold?" The nurse's smile didn't falter. "A standard 48-hour psychiatric hold, sir. Just for observation. It's for your own safety." The ticking clock had started. In 2 days, David and his doctor would go before a probate judge with the papers I'd signed and a medical evaluation from their accomplice. They would make the temporary order permanent. I had 48 hours to stop the erasure of my life. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the cheap cotton of the pajamas scratching my skin. I thought of David as a boy, sitting on my lap in my study while I reviewed case files. He would trace the Latin phrases in my law books, his small finger following the text. "What does it mean, Daddy?" he'd ask. "It means that the law must be fair, son, no matter who you are." What a joke. The law was a weapon, and my own son was pointing it directly at my heart. An hour later, I was pacing the small room, my mind racing through legal precedents and civil rights statutes. There had to be a way out. I was a judge. I knew the system, but every path I considered was a dead end. David had my signature. He had a concurring medical opinion. He controlled my access to finances, to my own lawyer, to the outside world. He had built a perfect legal prison, and I was its first and only inmate. My door was ajar, a deliberate choice to allow observation. It also allowed me to hear. Muffled voices drifted down the corridor. One was David's. The other, deeper and more clinical, belonged to Dr. Evans. They were standing near the nurse's station, believing they were out of earshot. I flattened myself against the wall next to the door, straining to listen, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "The paperwork is filed," Dr. Evans said, his voice low. "The hearing is set for Wednesday at 10 a.m. With the signed PLA and my assessment, it will be a rubber stamp." There was a rustle of paper. "Good," David replied. "And the apartment?" "The broker said the market is hot. We can't wait on this. I want to list it by the end of the month. We need to liquidate the primary assets before anything gets complicated." The betrayal was no longer just about control. It was about money. Quick money. The trust documents are a bit more complex. The doctor continued, and I realized he was more than a medical accomplice. He was a partner. "But with you as conservator, we can petition to have them dissolved. It will take time, but it's doable." There was a pause. Then I heard David laugh, a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. He never would have given it up otherwise. He's been sitting on that money for decades. It's for his own good. Our good. The truth. Finally, in a hushed hospital corridor, I slid down the wall, my legs suddenly weak. The sheer, calculated greed of it was staggering. This wasn't a misguided attempt to protect a declining father. This was a heist, planned with cold, sober precision. They had mapped out every contingency, every legal loophole. They had dissected my life and sorted it into piles. assets to be liquidated, and sentimental junk, like an old gavel, to be put in storage. A new resolve hardened within me, cold and clear as ice. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was finished, medicated, and marginalized. They had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just Leonard, the confused father. I was Judge Leonard, and for 40 years, my entire life had been about one thing: the precise and patient application of the law. My son had started a war. He just didn't realize I had already chosen the battlefield. The next morning, I refused the mild sedative the nurse offered with my breakfast. "I'd like to speak with a lawyer," I said, my voice calm and firm. "It is my right." The nurse gave me a practiced, pitying smile. "Of course, Judge, I'll let your son know." She was just following a script. My rights were now privileges, to be granted or denied by the very person who had stripped them from me. Hope was a dangerous thing, but I had to try. 2 hours later, David walked in, followed by a young man in a suit, so sharp it could cut glass. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Dad, this is Mr. Peterson," David said. "I've retained him on your behalf to manage your affairs. He's from one of the best firms in the city." Peterson extended a hand, but I didn't take it. This wasn't my lawyer. This was my jailer's lawyer. "I want independent counsel," I stated, looking Peterson directly in the eye. "Someone of my own choosing." Peterson's smile was a thin, bloodless line. "I can assure you, Judge, my only concern is the preservation of your estate and well-being, as directed by your son, who now holds your power of attorney. We are all on the same team here." The legalistic jargon was a smokescreen designed to suffocate my will. The crushing defeat was absolute. They had anticipated this move. By signing that document at my party, I had signed away my right to fight back through conventional means. David had just legally barred me from hiring a lawyer to sue him. It was a perfect, diabolical checkmate. The trap wasn't just sprung, it was hermetically sealed. My son patted my shoulder. "See, Dad, everything's taken care of. You just rest." They left me in the silent white room. The 48-hour clock was now 36. My legal mind, the tool I had honed for a lifetime, was useless. I was disarmed, isolated, and legally gagged. I lay back on the pillow, closing my eyes, the full weight of my powerlessness pressing down on me. There was no way out, not through the front door, not through the courts. But then an image surfaced from the depths of my despair, a worn rosewood gavel, tossed carelessly onto a desk. That gavel. It wasn't just wood and varnish. It was the weight of Isabel's belief in me. She'd placed it in my hands the day I took my oath. "For when your judgment is sound and your heart is true," she had whispered. David saw a paperweight. I saw the bedrock of my entire career, a promise I made to a woman now gone. And in that moment, it felt like another promise I had failed to keep. An orderly brought my lunch. He didn't speak, just placed the plastic tray on the rolling table and left. The clatter of the lid echoed in the silent room. I remembered Sunday dinners in my apartment, the scent of Isabel's rosemary chicken, the warmth of the fireplace, David and Chloe laughing. The contrast was a physical pain, a hollowness in my chest that had nothing to do with hunger. I was being systematically erased. I pushed the tray away. The food was a pale, lukewarm collection of shapes: cubed carrots, mashed potatoes from a packet, and something gray that was allegedly meat. Eating it felt like consenting to my own captivity. Outside, a maintenance worker was pressure washing the brick wall. The rhythmic hiss and spray, a monotonous soundtrack to my imprisonment. There was no escape, not even in my own thoughts. Peterson, the lawyer, returned that afternoon. He carried a leather-bound folio and an air of professional sympathy that was more insulting than open contempt. "Judge," he began, "David has asked me to begin the process of managing your personal effects. We need to inventory the contents of the apartment for the estate appraisal." He slid a document across the table. It was a consent form authorizing an auction house to enter my home. "The appraisers are very discreet," Peterson continued, oblivious to my silence. "They will identify any items of significant value for consignment. First editions, art, antiques, that sort of thing. It's a standard procedure to maximize the estate's liquidity. He was talking about selling my life, piece by piece, to the highest bidder. My wife's collection of porcelain birds, my father's chess set. I said nothing, my face a blank mask. I decided to test him. Under State Probate Code Section 1872, doesn't the subject of a conservatorship petition have the right to contest the disposition of personal property prior to the final hearing? My tone was even, academic. Peterson blinked, momentarily thrown. He recovered quickly, a condescending smile playing on his lips. That's a very good question for an old-timer. But the POA you signed gives David discretionary power. It's all perfectly legal. Later, Chloe visited. She carried a large familiar photo album and avoided my gaze. I thought you might like these, she mumbled, placing it on my bed. She looked tired, her face etched with a conflict she refused to voice. David is he's worried. He's trying to do what's best. She was reciting a script, trying to convince herself as much as me. She was the silent accomplice, drowning her conscience in flimsy justifications. I opened the album after she left. Page after page of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. And then I saw it. A photograph from 1983, me in my new robes, standing beside a beaming Isabel. In my hand was the gavel. It looked new then, the wood gleaming. I remembered that day, what we did right after the photo was taken. In the privacy of my new chambers, the gavel wasn't just a symbol, it was a vessel, and it was now lost to me. A forgotten treasure in a box of junk. My daughter's words echoed in my head. We put all your old work things in a box for you, even that old wooden hammer thing. She had confirmed it. The most important document of my entire life was sitting in a cardboard box in my study, dismissed as an old wooden hammer thing. They had the key to their own destruction in their hands, and were too arrogant, too greedy, to even look at it. It was the most profound despair I had ever known. This was my lowest point. Not the signing of the papers, not the arrival at this facility, but this moment of utter clarity. The one tool that could save me was in their possession, unrecognized and on its way to an auction block. I was truly, completely helpless. The 48-hour clock was a death knell. My son wouldn't just take my money. He would auction off my last testament without ever knowing what he'd done. That evening, a young aide came in to check my vitals. She was new. I hadn't seen her before. Her name tag read Sarah. Unlike the others, she had kind eyes. "You were a judge?" she asked softly, noticing the album. My grandpa was a lawyer. He always talked about the law like it was something sacred. Her simple decency was a splash of cold water to my face. It was the first time in 2 days anyone had spoken to me like a human being. I simply nodded, not trusting my voice. "Your son calls the head nurse a lot to check on you," she added, fluffing my pillow. "He must be very worried." There it was again, David's meticulous stage management. He wasn't just controlling me, he was controlling the narrative around me, ensuring every staff member here saw him as the devoted, anxious son. His cruelty wasn't impulsive, it was exhaustively planned. A plan began to form, a desperate, long-shot gamble. I couldn't use the phone. Peterson had made it clear my calls would be assisted. I couldn't write a letter, it would be read. I was being watched, managed, and assessed. So I had to use their own narrative against them. I had to become the man they believed me to be, a frail, sentimental old fool, lost in the fog of his past. The next morning, when the nurse came with a small paper cup of pills, I took them without argument. I smiled faintly, a docile patient. I asked her about her children. I played the part. When Dr. Evans made his rounds, I didn't challenge him with legal statutes. I asked him if he thought it would rain. I fumbled for a word. I let my eyes drift to the window, as if my concentration was failing. "He seems to be adapting," I heard Evans tell the head nurse later. "The anxiety has lessened. He's much calmer today." My performance was working. They were lowering their guard. They had classified me as a problem solved, a package to be delivered to the probate court. Their arrogance was becoming my only shield, my only weapon. The hunter was relaxing his grip on the trap. The clock was now at 24 hours. The hearing was tomorrow. I needed to get a message to Maria, my former law clerk of 20 years. She was fiercely loyal and sharp as a tack. She was my only hope. But how to reach her without raising a single red flag? The request had to be so mundane, so steeped in senile sentimentality, that David would not only allow it, but would see it as confirmation of my decline. I requested my one permitted personal call. I asked for Chloe, not David. It was a calculated choice. She was the weak link, the one burdened by a flicker of conscience. I knew David would listen in or get an immediate report, but the request coming through her would soften it. "Chloe, my dear," I began, my voice a carefully constructed tremor. "I was just thinking of your mother. There's an old book in my study," I continued, letting my voice crack slightly. "A copy of Cicero's letters. Your mother gave it to me when I first became a prosecutor. It's on the bottom shelf, behind the dictionaries. It would mean the world to have it here with me." I paused, letting the silence hang. Could you perhaps call Maria, my old clerk? She was always so good at finding my books. She'll know the exact one. I could hear Chloe's breath catch. I had played the Isabel card, the one thing she was still sentimental about. "Of course, Daddy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll call Maria right away." It was done. The request was so pathetic, so perfectly in character for the man they thought I was, that David wouldn't see the threat. An old Nan wanted an old book. What harm could there be in that? But David's arrogance was only one part of the equation. The other was Maria. For 20 years, we'd navigated threats and high-stakes trials. Early on, we had established a set of break-glass contingency codes, simple, innocuous phrases to be used only in the direst of circumstances, when normal communication was compromised. The phrase Cicero's letters was the most serious of them all. It was our dead man switch. The code meant one thing: I am compromised and under duress. My last written directive is now active. Execute it immediately. Do not confirm. Do not reply. Do not delay. Execute. The book itself was irrelevant. The trigger was the phrase, delivered via a third party to the one person I trusted to understand it. That directive was a single notarized letter prepared a year after Isabel died. I had lodged it with my true legal counsel, Jonathan Pierce, a man David had never met. The letter was to be opened by him only upon receiving word from Maria that the code was active. It contained a full, preemptive refutation of any claims of my incompetence, and more importantly, it activated a secondary, secret power of attorney. Now, there was nothing to do but wait. The machine was in motion, or it wasn't. I had launched my last, desperate missile from the bottom of a silo, and I had no way of knowing if it had even cleared the launch tube. The next 18 hours until the hearing would be the longest of my life. I stared at the ceiling, the institutional white blurring into a screen for my fears and hopes. Did Chloe make the call? Did Maria understand the instruction hidden within a pathetic request? Was Jonathan Pierce, a man I hadn't spoken to in 6 months, even in the city? My son thought he was playing chess, but he had failed to see that I had placed a single explosive charge beneath the board years ago. My entire future now depended on a faint memory of a whispered code. Sleep was impossible. Every creak in the hallway, every distant siren was a potential sign. I was a judge again, waiting for a jury to return with a verdict. Only this time, the life they were deliberating was my own. The sun would rise in a few hours, and with it would come either my final, legal burial or a resurrection so swift and total it would shatter my son's world completely. The morning of the hearing arrived with the sterile gray light. An orderly brought me a suit. My own. It felt alien on my skin. He also brought a message. Your son is on his way to escort you to the courthouse. The final insult. He would parade me into the building where I once commanded absolute respect, presenting me as a relic, a ward of the state he was so benevolently protecting. David arrived, his face a perfect blend of solemn duty and filial piety. "Ready, Dad?" he asked, adjusting my tie as if I were a child. The gesture was intimate and grotesque. He didn't see a father. He saw a prop for the final act of his play. I nodded mutely, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Had Maria gotten the message? Was Jonathan on his way? There was no sign. Walking through the courthouse corridors was a surreal nightmare. Lawyers and clerks I had known for decades averted their eyes. Whispers followed in our wake. I was a ghost haunting the halls of my own legacy. David's hand was firm on my elbow, a constant proprietary pressure. We were heading to probate court, room 3B, a small, unremarkable chamber where lives were quietly and bureaucratically dismantled. Inside, Judge Atherton, a man I had mentored 30 years ago, sat on the bench. He looked down at me with an expression of profound discomfort and pity. David's lawyer, Peterson, was at the plaintiff's table, a neat stack of documents before him. It was all happening exactly as they had planned. My stomach churned. The missile had failed. The code had been for nothing. I was truly, finally, alone. Case number 2023-PC 1138, the bailiff droned, in the matter of the conservatorship of Judge Leonard Miller. David guided me to the respondent's table. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on my back. Peterson began his opening statement, his voice smooth and persuasive. He painted a picture of a brilliant mind in tragic decline, of a loving son forced to make a difficult choice. "We have assigned power of attorney," Peterson said, holding up the document for my birthday party, and a sworn medical evaluation from Dr. Evans, attesting to Judge Miller's diminished capacity and the immediate danger he poses to his own welfare. He placed the papers on the judge's bench. It was a slam dunk, uncontested. Atherton picked them up, his face grim. He was about to speak. Then, the courtroom doors swung open with a loud bang that made everyone jump. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit strode in, carrying a briefcase. "My apologies for the interruption, Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "Jonathan Pierce, appearing on behalf of my client, Judge Leonard Miller." A collective gasp went through the room. David's head whipped around, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Objection," Peterson stammered, scrambling to his feet. "The respondent is not capable of retaining counsel. My client holds power of attorney." Atherton held up a hand, his eyes now sharp and focused, the pity gone. "Mr. Pierce," he said, a new respect in his tone. "On what grounds do you appear?" Jonathan opened his briefcase. "On the grounds of a pre-existing superseding legal directive, Your Honor, and on the grounds of criminal conspiracy and fraud." He produced a document sealed in a heavy vellum envelope. "This is a notarized letter deposited with my firm on March 12, 2019. It contains specific instructions to be triggered by a coded message, which my office received yesterday afternoon." He broke the seal. "The letter appoints me, Jonathan Pierce, as power of attorney, effective immediately, upon any attempt by a third party, specifically David Miller, to claim my client is incapacitated." David went pale. That's impossible," he sputtered. "He signed the papers." Jonathan ignored him, addressing the judge. "The document is a legally binding trust activation, Your Honor. It voids any subsequent POA as a product of undue influence. It also triggers a full audit of the estate and freezes all assets, and it contains this." He pulled out a small microcassette recorder and a set of sworn affidavits. "My client's former clerk, Maria, began a quiet investigation yesterday," Jonathan announced. "We have a sworn statement from the doorman of Judge Miller's building, attesting to his lucid state on the day he was forcibly removed. We also have a recording of a conversation between David Miller and Dr. Evans, discussing their intent to liquidate the estate for personal profit." He pressed play. David's voice, cold and greedy, filled the stunned silence of the courtroom. "I want to list it by the end of the month," my son's recorded voice echoed off the wood panel walls. "We need to liquidate the primary assets." The public humiliation was now his. Every head in the room turned to stare at him. His mask of concern had shattered, revealing the ugly, avaricious face beneath. Judge Atherton's face was thunderous. He slammed his own gavel down. "This hearing is adjourned," he boomed. Mr. Miller, Mr. Peterson, Dr. Evans, you will not leave this courthouse. Bailiff, secure them. I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation into charges of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. David looked at me, his eyes wide with panic and hatred. He saw, for the first time, not the doddering old man he had created in his mind, but the judge who had taught him everything he knew about the law. He had tried to use the law as a cudgel, and I had just shown him it was a rapier. Then, Jonathan produced one last item from his briefcase. It was my gavel. Maria, bless her soul, must have retrieved it. My client had one final instruction in his letter, Your Honor, Jonathan said, his voice ringing with theatrical flair. It concerns this seemingly sentimental object. He walked to the witness stand and twisted the base of the gavel. It unscrewed, revealing a hollowed-out chamber inside. From the chamber, he carefully extracted a small, rolled-up parchment. This is the original, handwritten codicil to Judge Miller's late wife's will, establishing the family trust. It contains a reversion clause. It states that should any beneficiary act with malicious intent to defraud another, their share of the trust is immediately and irrevocably forfeited and redistributed to the remaining heirs. He looked at Chloe, who was now openly weeping in the back of the courtroom. Then he looked at David. In his greed, your son didn't just try to steal his father's freedom. He has, by his own actions, legally disinherited himself from his mother's legacy. Everything he sought to gain is now gone. David crumpled into his chair as if he'd been shot. The object David had dismissed as a worthless paperweight was the very instrument of his undoing. It was not just a symbol of the law, it was the physical vessel of the one clause that could destroy him. A testament to Isabel's foresight and my own. She always knew David had a vein of weakness, of greed. A failsafe, she had called it. Just in case, Jonathan placed the gavel on the table in front of me. Its weight felt familiar, solid and righteous in my hand. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room fixed on me. I was no longer a victim. I was Judge Leonard Miller. I looked at my son, a broken man about to be swallowed by the system he had tried to manipulate. I looked at the bench, where Judge Atherton was watching me with a look of awe and deep respect. I turned, without a word, to David or Chloe and walked out of the courtroom. Jonathan fell into step beside me. The afternoon sun hit my face as we pushed through the heavy courthouse doors, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was free. I didn't look back.